Howdy, this is Jonathan Scott. Welcome to John's D&D Vlog, episode number 3. Today we'll be talking about Psionics. Psionics is a weird part of 1st edition D&D that had its origins actually back with old D&D. I haven't spoken about old D&D much in the series yet, but I will. I'll start going over it more fully with episode 5. Psionics first appeared in 1976 in the book Eldritch Wizardry, starting on page 7. The form of it, though, that I use comes from the 1st edition Player's Handbook, pages 110 to 117. TSR and Wizards of the Coast have published many different books on psionics over the years, but for those of us who use 1st and 2nd edition rules, there are really only 2 other books that you might want to check out. The 1st edition Player's Handbook laid the groundwork down for psionics pretty well, but honestly speaking, the organization and writing style, though, could have been better. It was hard for some people to understand. So, in 1983, TSR decided to devote an issue of their magazine, The Dragon, to psionics. In this issue, they tried to clear up some of the confusion, and they also tried to broaden the scope of psionics by adding a new race who are naturally more capable of psionics than the other races, the Darani. They also added a class called the Psionicist that those who had psionics could join. Lastly, in 1991, after 2nd edition D&D had come on the scene, TSR published the complete Psionics Handbook. So for those of you who want to see what 2nd edition psionics looked like, this is the book for you. In my campaign, though, we only use the rules mentioned in the 1st edition Player's Handbook. There are also a few pages in the 1st edition Dungeon Master's Guide that apply, but honestly speaking, I never really found a need to use those 2 other books that I mentioned. So, quickly, what are psionics? Classically, psionics are the mental powers more highly developed races have access to in some science fiction stories. The big-headed Telosians from the first episode of Star Trek, the old series, were kind of the standard of the super mentally gifted in sci-fi up until D&D began. Professor X and Marvel Girl from the X-Men comics, Obi-Wan Kenobi from Star Wars Episode 4, and Buddy Ebsen's character Jimbo from the episode The Prime Mover from the television series The Twilight Zone. These are all classical variations of the psionic. According to Oxford dictionaries, the word psionic dates back to the 1950s. It appears that there is no scientific origin to the word. It seems that it just comes from science fiction. I'm going to run you through a couple of examples on determining whether or not your character has psionics and how much psionic power he has. Trying to understand exactly how to follow all those rules, for some people, they had a hard time because they don't offer a lot of examples within it, and the writing style is a little cramped. It would have been nice if they had fleshed things out a little bit more, so I thought I'd just take you through one particular example of trying to figure out whether or not a character has psionics. So step number 1, you got to figure out whether or not your guy even has a chance at it. Intelligence, wisdom, or charisma have to be 16 or better, one of them. Which means that, as a rule, wizards and clerics are going to be the ones more inclined to have psionics at all, which means it's kind of prejudiced against fighters and such, but that's just the way it is, I guess. But anyway, in this particular instance, Bob the Dwarf, his intelligence, wisdom, and charisma, none of them are 16 or better. So he has no chance. But this guy does, Sam the Wizard. He's got intelligence, wisdom, and charisma that are actually quite high. So now you have to roll 1d100 to see whether or not he has it. And you start out with a 100, but then you can subtract from that number depending on if you've got high scores or not. The rules are listed here. As it turns out, Sam only needed a 93. You have to roll 93 or better to have it. And for this particular example, yes, he rolled it. He got a 98. So he has psionic. One side note on all of this, a player's stats will change over time. As they go up in levels, sometimes their stats will also increase. So this number that he rolled, as the DM, you should probably write this down somewhere, because later on, if his intelligence, wisdom, or charisma does increase, it's entirely possible that he may develop that psionic ability after the fact. Once you figured out whether or not he has them, then you have to see how much he has. So you start out with 0, and then you add 1 for each point in intelligence, wisdom, or charisma that's over 12. And if 2 of those scores are 16 or better, then you double that number, and if all 3 of them are better than 16, then you quadruple it. So in this particular instance, Sam's numbers are going to be 17, and all 3 of those scores are 16 or better, so it's 17 times 4, so that's 68. 68 plus he rolled an 85, so that makes a grand total of 153. So his psionic strength is 153, and that number has 2 different meanings. It's his attack strength, but it's also his defense strength. So from here on out, psionics can get into these mental combats with other psionics. That's not all psionics can do, but that's a big, huge share of what they talk about in the book. So every time you attack somebody psionically, you use some of these points. Every time you defend yourself psionically, you use some of these points. And then you can get those points back by going on to page 117 of your player's handbook to figure out how. It shows the rates that you can get those points back. So let's look at a sample battle between Sam the Wizard and a Mind Flayer, also known as an Illithid. They're both about equal in strength and defense points. Sam is going to choose a very strong attack and a very strong defense. The Mind Flayer is choosing a weaker attack and a weaker defense. When it comes to these psychic battles, I can't really show you the books. If I show you too much, it invades on others' fair use rights. I can tell you the page numbers, though. You can find the combat data for Psionics on pages 76 to 78 of your first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. Also, if you'd like to see what a psychic battle might look like in the game, please check out X-Men issue number 117. Professor X has a cool battle in that one. So, here we go. First things first, both of these psionics are with their parties when they meet. Neither are alone. In a psionic battle, though, no one else can help out because the battle is pretty much instantaneous. In other words, as the DM, take care of the psionic battle before you deal with anything else. Just get it out of the way. When two psionics meet, they're immediately aware of each other. If any psionic initiates an attack, a defense is automatically raised by the defender. You can't surprise a psionic with a psionic attack. As mentioned in the Dungeon Master's Guide, all attacks and defenses are simultaneous, so everybody attacks at the same time, and everybody defends at the same times. And each round you'll lose attack points depending on how you attacked, and defense points depending on how you defended yourself, but then you're also going to lose a little bit more depending on how somebody else attacked you. Most attacks work by whittling down the victim's defense point total until it gets to 0. After that, all the damage that is done from a psychic attack goes to the hit points instead, and you physically die from a psionic attack. In Sam's case, though, he's going to use a Psychic Crush. Psychic Crushes don't deal points of damage. Instead, they have a percentage chance of just killing the opponent outright. So Sam is kind of gambling. He's hoping that he'll roll well enough. If his rolls fail, though, the Illithid's defense point total won't go down, and Sam will lose. Each round, Sam loses 14 points to his attack strength from his Psychic Crush, and 22 points from his defense strength because of his own Tower of Iron Will, but also the damage that the Mind Flayer's Mind Thrust inflicts on him. A total of 22. On the other hand, the Illithid will only lose 4 because of his attack, and 3 because of his defense that he's chosen. He's hoping that he'll roll well enough each time to avoid dying from Sam's Psychic Crush. Let's look at the beginning of round 2 to see how well each side fared. The Illithid rolled well and is safe. He didn't die from the Psychic Crush. Therefore, Sam loses the 14 to his strength and 22 to his defense, and he's not going to last long if he has to keep doing this every round. The Illithid only loses 4 to his strength and 3 to his defense, and then let's go on to next round to see what happens there. And once again, the Illithid rolled well enough to not die. He's safe. And Sam loses another 14 and 22. The Illithid loses another 4 and 3. So here it's just subtracting numbers every round. And let's look at the beginning of round 4. This time the Illithid did not roll well and dies. Sam has lost a lot of defense points and attack points, but he survived. So his aggressive style paid off. Once again, if the Illithid had survived and whittled Sam's defense points down to 0, the points of damage that he would have taken from that point on would have instead been applied to his hit points. He would have been killed physically that way from a mental attack. From here on out, I'll be talking about the part of psionics that I prefer. I always saw psionics in D&D as something like being a mutant in the comics. Some people are just born with a special power. Wolverine could regenerate from any wound, Colossus could turn his skin into steel, Storm could control the weather. The whole idea of mental battles is fine, but to have each and every psionic be a little Professor X out there running around feels a little redundant. So instead, I focus on the disciplines. They're fun, and they make the character's experience quite enjoyable. Psionics actually aren't really that good for game balance, but they are great for the storyline. In pages 110 to 117 of your first edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Player's Handbook, there's a lot of spell-like abilities described there, the disciplines. You give these out to your players when they first roll up their character, and then their abilities don't much change at all over time. Anyway, that part of psionics I always thought was pretty well explained, so I won't go into it here. The psychic battles, they don't occur much at the beginning of your player's game. You won't actually deal with psychic battles until your players reach higher levels and begin to encounter things like mind flayers. So it's coming, but it'll be a while. The disciplines, though, they affect your game from the first day on, so you got to really know the disciplines well. One last piece of advice, I always saw psionics as a parallel magic system in D&D. it's a completely different type of powers. So if your players ever find themselves in a magic dead zone, or like behind an anti-magic shell, the psionic powers they have, in my opinion, should still function just fine. The magic dead zone won't hinder them at all. That's just my opinion. Well, that's about it. That's all I have to say about psionics. They're fun. They can add some flavor to your campaign. Some people don't like them, but I like them. Have fun. I'll see you next week. Next week I'll take you through a sample combat. That'll be the next episode. Until then, though, as always, have a nice day.